If I could now get your attention, we are enormously fortunate, grateful we will be, to have such an exalted, immense actor as this person is, to come to our school, albeit in a virtual sense. So there's something positive about the horrible last few years of COVID that we've experienced, that such things are now more and more common, that we're conducting meetings like this online. But without further ado, I'm going to save all the chatter.
And how should I get online?
One of the great actors of all time, even if big drum roll. Can we give him a drum roll? A big round of applause for Sir Ian McKellen, please.
Can you see me?
Can you hear me at the back, Mother? Hello, Ian. Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. Hello, everybody. Give us a wave again.
There we are.
Lovely.
How are you, sir?
I'm all right. I've not been long up.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm out of bed.
Right.
Very nice to see you, Joe.
And you too.
And
you too. You're looking fantastic, albeit early hours it is for you.
Cheers.
And can I just ask you, as we just jump into this, is that a Lowry sitting on the wall behind you?
Looks it is. It's by a friend of his called Alan Lowndes. It's the same area.
Same school.
In the north of England. It's the sort of thing I used to know as a kid.
Yeah.
The fairground, you know, with all the swings and roundabouts. Yes.
Is it Wigan or somewhere generally northwest? Is it Wigan or somewhere generally northwest?
It's in Stockport, which is in the north of England.
The posh part.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, listen. Very quick. I'm not going to go in a chronological way with this. We're all extremely excited, and I hope I can get through all the questions that I've been sent.
All right.
It's amazing to have you sitting here with us. 2 years ago you played King Lear, and then Hamlet, which 50 years or so after you first did it, and I believe you're going up, well, I know that you're going up to Edinburgh to do Hamlet again in a modern dance theatre production concept, which we might ask you about.
Does everybody know the play of Hamlet by William Shakespeare?
I think they've got some idea. Hands up, those of you that know.
There going on.
Yeah, there we go. Which is incredible.
It's about a young man who's much closer to your age than he is to mine. And when I first played it on stage, I was the right sort of age, but I wasn't very good in the part. And I thought, oh, well, that's the end of Hamlet. No more Hamlets for me. And then an old friend of mine, a director, just before COVID lockdown, said, he would like to do an age-blind production. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that somebody as old as me could play a young man, and the audience presumably wouldn't notice. And to make it all more complicated, or easier, maybe, Laertes, the beginning of the play, a friend of Hamlet, was played by a woman, and there was a mixture of races in the play as well. So you were just meant to get on with understanding the story and not worry about anything. Well, that seems to be how it worked out. And I really enjoyed capering around as a young man, although I didn't get dressed up as a young man, or I kept my white hair and everything else. And I thought, well, that's the end of Hamlet, thank goodness. And then I was asked to get involved in a ballet of Hamlet, a dance Hamlet. And with a company in Edinburgh. So at this year's Edinburgh Festival, which happens every year, I shall be on stage with a young man in his early 20s who's going to be dancing the part of Hamlet, but without speaking, and I will supply some of the words for him.
Wow.
And I want to do it, not because I want to carry on doing Hamlet, but because I want to find out how you actually create a ballet. I think it'll be very interesting for me to see that. I should add to all this, before we did the play just last year, before COVID, because we couldn't open the theatre, we decided to film Hamlet. So we made a film of Hamlet before we actually did it on stage. So I'm overflowing with Hamlet, and I hope that this time, after the dance, it really is all over and I can get on to.
Well, that's amazing. There's a fitness coach friend of mine who's asked. He's a huge fan of yours. He knows all your movies. He's asked the question, in light of doing the dance Hamlet and everything you've been doing of late, and I'm thinking of King Lear, which we saw on our trip to London 2 years ago or more. What's your fitness regime? How do you keep that energy, that stamina? What are you taking?
Well, I'm just drinking some vitamin water and a little pill of another sort of vitamin. So I always start the day with that. Don't know what good that does me. Then I do Pilates. Do you know what that is? It's a form of stretching and exercise, a little bit like yoga, invented by a man called Joseph Pilates in the last century, and I do that with a trainer 2 or 3 times a week. And then I do a bit of lifting and stretching on an exercise machine as well, a couple of times a week. And that's about it. And I walk whenever I can, and I go on. Whenever I go on the public transport on the underground in London, I always make sure that I walk up the escalators to keep my legs fit. And I don't drink alcohol, and I try to eat sensibly.
That's good.
And then perhaps I've got quite good genes that I've inherited from my parents.
I think so. Well, I'm going to jump on now to one of our students, and the first question, Indiana, if you don't mind running over here. In light of, I suppose, some connection with COVID and what's happened to the theatre and so on, here's a question. I wonder if you'd like to take this on.
Go ahead.
So I'm Indy, and it's nice meeting you, Sir Ian.
Thank you.
My question to you is, in a world where tech is taking over more and more and streaming services are impacting on cinema releases, how do you think theatre and cinemas can survive in a digital age?
Well, I know that is a question I've asked myself and I've talked about with friends. It's right to the heart of what has emerged after all the lockdowns with COVID, where theatres were closed and audiences could not meet actors in the flesh, and so we all started doing little on-screen performances and sending them to each other, and everybody was forced to stay at home, and so at home, of course, they watched Netflix, and if they were lucky enough to live in this country, the BBC television and so on, and go less and less to the cinema. So the films began to get a little bit smaller, maybe, in their aims, rather than the big blockbusting epics that you enjoy on the large screen. Well, I got very pessimistic that maybe the theatres would never reopen. People would get used to staying at home, would forget how much they enjoyed live theatre. Well, I'm very happy to say that here we are, some months after lockdown has stopped here. The theatres are thriving in London. Outside, it's a different matter. But I suspect it's all going to come back to what it was. And take some comfort from the fact that when Shakespeare was alive, when there were 2 or 3 theatres in London holding a lot of people and doing a lot of performances, often the plague would come to town, and the law was that the theatres had to close so that there couldn't be a spread of the disease. And what did the actors do? Well, sometimes they got on their horse and cart and went round the rather small country of England and took their performances to people who lived away from London. And what did Shakespeare do during one closed down of theatres that lasted a few months? He wrote Macbeth and Coriolanus and King Lear, three of his masterpieces. That's what he did during the lockdown. But I think generally things certainly have changed, even in the time since I started acting, when there was an awful lot of theatre going on in this country. Every town of a decent size, every city, had its own theatre, paid for by public money, and there would be a troupe of actors who would be employed for the whole year and do a different play for the local audiences every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and standards were quite high, and a young actor leaving drama school or wanting to become a professional actor could join one of these groups and train on the job. This is not now available to us.
Do you think there was...
I think the thing to remember or realise is that I do, because I am an audience. I love going to the theatre. There's something very, very special about being in the presence of the person who's telling the story, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Whether it's your mother and father when you're a kid, whether it's a teacher when you're at school, or whether it's a group of actors on stage with you sitting in the dark in the audience. I think the allure of the actual performance in front of your eyes for you, not for next night or last night, but for us now. Theatre is all about now. Will always be tempting to human beings. Just as it's much more thrilling to see a football match in reality, sitting in the stands, than watching it home on TV.
Absolutely.
It's the same with the theatre.
I mean, I'd like to think that there's some affirmation about theatre and how much we need it because of COVID, because we missed it. We you know, it was taken away from us. I think people will start to realise just how important it is. And it's interesting.
Is there a lot of live theatre where you are?
No, well, this is what's exciting, because it's only just started. Obviously, where we are has had its situation after the 1970s. Theatres were closed, and we've got one that's just opened up, and it does suggest immense possibility for the future. An interesting experience it will be. You've answered a question that I was going to ask about. You've said that there was much more theatre when you were growing up around. So, because I guess there was less television. But I've got now another student here, Alicia, who would like to jump into that very experience of theatre when you were growing up.
Okay, good.
Hi. Do you remember the first play you saw? And can you tell us about your experience of theatre when you were young?
Ooh. I think I can. I was 3 years old.
Wow, you can remember that? 3.
Well, yes, I do. I can remember the occasion and what the play was. It was Peter Pan, which is an old play by J.M. Barrie, a Scots writer, done in this country often at Christmas time. And it's an exciting story because it's about a little boy who will not grow up. He never grows up. He's permanently young. Can you imagine that? Permanently your own age?
Be great. Ish.
Rather odd. And he lives in Neverland. And the heroine of the story, who falls in love with Peter, Wendy, goes off and she and her brother get to Peter's secret island by flying. So there's actual flying on the stage, but that's achieved by having a harness around your body under your clothes with a wire, which is hopefully invisible. Well, age 3, we went to see this at a nearby theatre, and I was very disappointed because I knew there was going to be flying in it, but I could see the wires. And I could tell that wasn't a real dog running around. It was a man with a rug on his back, barking. I was very disappointed with a lot of it. But at the same time, there was something very magical about the scenery that I liked, and the story which my mother had told me beforehand. And we had to leave early, I remember that. And just as we were leaving the auditorium, I looked back at the stage and I thought to myself, age 3, I'm coming back. I like this.
Really?
And this, I think, was the experience of going out with my parents and my sister, 5 years older than me, and sitting with a group of strangers, all watching the same story being told, and all enjoying it together. Simply the fact of being in a full theatre. So Peter Pan it was, and very soon after that, plays done by local amateur troops of Shakespeare, Macbeth and Twelfth Night I saw when I was about 10 or 11.
Wow. Was that, right, I'm just putting my mind back. That wouldn't have been the Woolfit era, would it? Donald Woolfit? No.
I didn't ever see Woolfit, but
No.
he was around.
Right.
I think he'd stopped touring in those days.
Wow. So then you obviously, I know about, you soaked up the theatre as a young man, a teenager, and then, in fact, I've got a colleague who did his teacher training at your grammar school, where you went, who's here in the back. He might pop up later, but I'd like to talk to you about now your university experience. Maha, you're there. So you've gone to university, Ian, to study English literature. What career were you thinking of pursuing, I wonder? What was it? A teacher? What were you
Well,
going to do?
I think often boys follow their father and do whatever he does for a living. Excuse me. Or want to become a teacher, because teachers are the first grown-ups that we often meet outside the family, aren't they? And if they are as impressive a teacher as you no doubt are, probably boys think, oh, I'd like to be like Mr. Flint, and girls would like to be like a female teacher. And that was my case. I liked the masters at our school. They were interested in the theatre. They took us on a school camp every year to watch plays at Stratford-upon-Avon, where William Shakespeare was born. That, when I went up to university, I thought probably I'm going to teach at the end, but I did so much acting at Cambridge as an undergraduate with other young students that, like them, I thought, oh, let me give it a go. I'd like to try and become a professional actor, so that's what happened.
Well, Maha has a question, which is about those undergraduate performances.
Oh, right.
Hello. So you did an
Hello.
amazing amount of plays at Cambridge. So I'm curious if you actually finished your degree. And was it at Cambridge that you finally realized you wanted to be an actor?
Yes, I did finish my degree. It wasn't a very good one, but that hasn't mattered, fortunately, because
Yeah.
it would have done if I'd become a teacher, perhaps, but no. I can remember the actual day, moment and place that I decided to become a professional actor. There were others who were already intending to become professionals after they'd finished their studies. I wasn't one of them, until I was in a Shakespeare play, Henry IV, Part 2, playing an old man, guess what, with a pointed beard and a long, pointy hat and a long beard. Not unlike Gandalf many years later. And there was a newspaper that seemed to think I was rather good and gave me a very nice review in the newspaper.
Yes.
And when I'd read that, I thought, oh, well, maybe I could try becoming an actor if the newspaper thinks I'm good. Up to that point, I thought I wasn't good enough to be an actor. Excuse me a minute.
That was, I mean, what I was staggered with when I read was that you think you did 21 plays in 3
Yeah.
years. That, aside from studying your English,
Yeah.
that's incredible.
Well, they were very, my tutors at Cambridge were very indulgent, and they didn't threaten to throw me out if I didn't work hard enough, and I clearly wasn't working hard enough because of all the plays I was in. I wasn't one of those clever people who could have an overriding hobby which takes up all the time and still do well academically. But there we are. I made a choice. I followed my heart, really, did what I wanted to do, and it seems to have worked out well.
So you've become a professional actor after university. I've got a question. Hajra, where are you? She's somewhere. I've got a question here. There'll be some questions I'd like to explore with the students, with yourself. Here's one from Hajra for you.
Hello, Hannah.
Hello. It's hard to imagine that you've had any bad reviews, but have you ever had any bad reviews on any part you've ever played?
Oh, yes. How nice of you to bring that up. Yes, I have. And I'm afraid I read the reviews. Some actors don't, you know, because they don't want to read nasty things about themselves. Or to get misled by nice things.
And how do you carry on with all the negative thoughts?
How do I what?
Carry on with all the negative thoughts surrounding you?
Well, when you're rehearsing a play, there's a lot of criticism of you goes on. That's what the director is there to do. Not to say you are terrible, but to say you're not doing it right, in my opinion. Why don't we try doing it this way? So there's lots of advice coming your way. And implied in advice is, of course, that you have not yet got it right, or that you could be better. So if then at the end of all that work, and that criticism, and self-criticism, someone who doesn't know the play half so well as you and the director gives you a bad review, you can always say to yourself, what the hell does he or she know? We've made this decision, the critic doesn't like it, I'm not going to worry if they weren't impressed. But of course you want any audience, critics or not, to enjoy the storytelling, and it can be upsetting. But I still go on reading reviews because I want to know what people think. And very, very occasionally they say something that is helpful.
Would you say that you're thick-skinned, Ian? Would you be thick-skinned, do you think, more than...
No, like any actor, like any person perhaps, I want to be liked. Of course I do. And I want to be thought good, and I want to be good at the job. And even at my age, I'm still trying to get better at acting. Each time I do a job, I hope I'm going to learn something. You know, the Hamlet, this time I'm going to learn about dancing, you know. So, being criticised is just part of the job. But there are many actors who will not read reviews because they don't want to know.
I remember Michael Hordern, the great Michael Hordern, in an interview, and he was being asked about critics, and he, as you well know, he did Prospero. It was with Jonathan Miller, I think. And but it was like 20 years after that, and he pounced on this theatre critic in a discussion and almost repeated word for word the negative review he got back from that critic. He'd remembered it for 20 years, ignored all the very good reviews, but carried that as a real sore in his mind, you know. It was
yes, I had a review, actually it was for Hamlet, way back, which said the best part of Ian McKellen's Hamlet is his curtain call. The sort of best part of my performance, it was not the acting at all, but when I took my bow at the end of the audience. Yes, you do. Of course, you remember the nasty things. But it's interesting. The next job I've got is in a film, and I'm going to be playing a theatre critic. It's set in London over 100 years ago, but when a critic could be very, very powerful. And I'm playing a critic who also happens to be a drunk. Not a very attractive man, but it'll be my chance to get my own back on those critics who haven't been very kind.
I thought most of them were. I thought that was why they went to see the plays. Free drinks and tickets, wasn't it? But anyway, that's...
I've been very lucky with critics. I've had some very, very nice reviews, and probably not deserved at all. But,
no, not at all. Well, let me bring it on to our next student, Hussein, if you don't mind. Just want to explore the idea of actors per se. I mean, you've had a massive influence on actors. I certainly can vouch for that. But here's Hussein with a question for you.
Hello.
Thank you.
Which
Hello.
actor or actors have inspired you when you were young, and why?
That's a good question. Do you know, many, many, many actors. There wasn't one actor, you know, above all else, who I admired. Because I thought they were all wonderful. That's why I liked going to the theatre and going to the cinema, just to see these amazing people who achieved things that I couldn't possibly, and used their imagination and then communicated their excitement to the audience. But I suppose, and Jerry will confirm this, when I was young, and he too, the great actor, recognised not just by people working with him, but by people who went to see him, was Sir Laurence Olivier. And you can catch up with him because he made a lot of films, and some of them are quite exciting. Like in Shakespeare, he did Henry V. He also played Hamlet when he was a bit too old. And Richard III was one of his big successes. And he was a very flamboyant actor, or could be. He was also a director. He was a movie star in Hollywood as a young man. And he was the first director ever of the National Theatre here in London, and that's when I worked for him, not with him. I was employed by that company. And he was always entertaining, and often you couldn't recognise him. He liked disguising himself, putting on false noses and wigs and pulling faces, which I think I try not to do these days, but you always got your money's worth when you saw Laurence Olivier, and perhaps he, because of his wide achievements, was a good model for a young actor to look up to. These days there are wonderful actors of all ages, and yes, I'm always in awe if I go to the theatre or to the cinema and swept up in the story because of the actors. I'm full of awe for them and admire them.
I was Peter Hall, you know. I was very young, and I was sat amongst, it was the Antony and Cleopatra production. It was just all the blokes doing a rehearsal, and I was sat there, and I had no idea the tactlessness of my question with the company that was present. And I asked, who was the great to Peter? I asked, who's the greatest actor you've ever directed, without missing a beat. He bounced back, which was a real surprise, Peter O'Toole. Before he had his nose done, he said, which was extraordinary, and that got me wondering about that. Was it difficult for you?
That's interesting, isn't it? Because Peter O'Toole let Peter Hall down.
Yeah.
He was also set to do a season at Stratford-upon-Avon, and he left to do
Become a movie star.
Lawrence of Arabia, and I think Peter Hall took him to the law court because he broke his contract.
Yeah, he did. When you began as an actor, a professional actor, what would you say are the differences that you remember from when you started out to possibly what you see today?
Oh,
Maybe there are
the changes that have happened in society are reflected in the theatre.
Yeah.
For instance, on the first day of rehearsals, usually, you put on your best clothes because it was a special occasion. If you had a suit, you put that on and a necktie, brushed your hair properly. And the management, in return, would probably serve up some champagne. It was an occasion, and the theatre took itself rather seriously, in a celebratory sort of way. These days, you know, everyone slouches in jeans and sneakers, and it doesn't matter. These are changes that have happened in society. I think it goes on pretty much as it always did. Young actors tend to think of work and get work, if they can, in films and in television, and don't do as much theatre as a matter of course, as I did, and as others did. But, you know, if that work is available, why not do it? So I don't, you know, actors are still very keen on entertaining audiences and work hard at it. I don't think there's much difference, really. Maybe the acting has got better. Now, that's a silly thing to say, isn't it? But ever since the first actors, actors have prided themselves on being real. That the audience could look at them and believe that they were in the presence of a character, even though the character was nothing like the real actor who was presenting it. And I think it's undoubtedly true that there have been fashions in reality. But when we look at an old movie and think that the acting is very stilted, a black and white movie, let's say, and the audience, the voices seem to be too posh, inappropriate, just different from what we expect now. It's simply that life was different in those days, and people were posher in public and dressed up all the time and presented themselves in a rather formal way. So as that has changed in society in the normal manner, so it's changed on the screen and on the stage. But I think all actors, whenever they lived, have always tried to be real for their audiences. Now you can get too real in that, you know, if you were to stand on the stage and just speak normally, as you would quietly to a friend in a room where there are only two of you together, that won't do in the theatre. You've got to be heard at the back of the auditorium. And to help that, actors are given microphones these days, and that is a change I don't much like. That often in the theatre, quite unnecessarily I think, actors are given microphones so their voice is amplified. And you don't always feel then in the audience that the actors care about you, and by making sure they can be heard, they leave it to technology to do that. And yes.
Well, let's.
But I think acting does change. It doesn't mean to say it gets better or worse.
Well, I've got a question.
Yes.
Looking at the different media now, this is Ninke. She's got a question for you, Ian.
Hi. Does being a skillful stage actor help to be a skillful film actor, or are the skills needed very different?
Well, good question. Acting wherever it happens is the same, but then it's also different. You know, if you're preparing for a part, as I am now to play this critic in a film, I'm rehearsing, but by myself. I'm reading the script all the time, I'm saying it out loud. Sometimes I stand in front of a mirror and pull faces and think, does that look like the man I'm going to play? I think he ought to be fat, and I'm not particularly fat, and I'm wondering if he's got some other, you know, something like that that makes him look as if he's fat. And oh, I hear my voice is getting a bit gruff. Well, maybe a character is going to emerge. You've got to do all that on your own for the cinema, because you don't really often get rehearsal. You just plunge in on the first day and expect it to do it. In theatre, it's all about rehearsal, isn't it? It's not until you've all done it together many times that you risk telling the story on stage in front of a live audience. But basically, the imagination that an actor has to use is the same, whatever part he's playing and wherever he's playing it. And don't forget, in the theatre, you could be in a small theatre, like the room you're in now, or it could be in a large theatre holding 3,000 or 5,000 people. There's obviously got to be a difference, because you have to be convincing for the audience who's sitting along where we're. So your performance becomes projected, it becomes bigger, it becomes slightly exaggerated, perhaps to the alarm of people sitting on the front row, like you are. So basically, in the theatre, you have to make sure everybody can hear you, everybody can receive your performance, and in the cinema, in front of the camera, you're not required to do that because the camera is so close. That's the audience, and that's why sometimes actors who've done a lot of theatre, when they get in front of a camera, tend to do too much because they've got used to projecting. But apart from that, I think acting is very similar.
Well, when we had Judi here a few months ago, Judi Dench,
Yes.
of course she, straight away, if I asked the question to you, theatre or film, which one for you? I think you know what her answer was, and she said why. What's your reaction to the difference in the media for you personally?
Well, when you do a film, you don't always do it in the order in which the scenes are written. You do it according to the locations that you happen, the scenery that you happen to need, and you do all the scenes that take place in that particular place, one after the other. It's all out of order. there's no audience. So if you've got a line that's funny,
That's difficult. That's difficult. There's
you
no-
never hear the approval from the audience. And when you finish the job, having played each scene many times until the director is happy with it, he goes away and starts cutting it all together, piecing, interlocking the different scenes and different takes that you did of the scene, and he or she will create the performance for you. Meanwhile, you're on to the next job. In the theatre, it's quite different. You rehearse with the director, who can be very helpful and dominating, perhaps. But come the first night, the director is nowhere to be seen. Not needed. The actors are in charge. Why? Because the live audience is there and the director has no part to play any longer. So that's why actors on the whole prefer the theatre. But I'm sentimental about it. It's just that when I was a kid, I used to see a lot of theatre. I fell in love with the theatre. But as an actor, that's why I wanted to become an actor, to see how it was done. And I still hold on to that. And it's the experience of being in front of an audience and hearing their laughter or their intake of breath when they're excited, and the silence that sometimes comes in a theatre if its performance is going well. That's what gets the adrenaline going, and you don't get that when you're in front of a camera.
As you said, it's the excitement of how it's done. I've got a question from Musa. If you'd like to put your question there.
Hi, Sir Ian.
Hello, good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm interested in the process of acting as a whole, and I know you've played villainous characters before, such as Hitler, and so I was wondering, how do you relate to those characters? How do you get into the mind of such a despicable character?
Who was the example you gave?
Hitler.
Hitler! Well, Hitler was an unusual case in that I was playing somebody who was a real person, and the lines that I was speaking had been spoken by him in real life. And I guess that many people looking at the performance on film would know what Hitler looked like and sounded like, and would have strong opinions about him, and as I did. In that case, I watched a lot of the film footage that exists, and I noticed that the way he was standing, and if you could tell that, was with the head rather forward, as if he'd got something wrong with his spine there. He wasn't a tall man, and I thought maybe I'd landed on how such a horrible person had become so powerful, was that he was in constant pain. And he was trying to be distracted from it. That was my way into Hitler. But if we take another horrible man, or a man who does dreadful things, Richard III, you can see this on film. I did it on stage, but we also filmed it. Again, I began to look at the sides of the man, and it seemed to me that the fact that his mother, played by Maggie Smith from Downton Abbey, was perfectly horrible to him from the day he was born, because he had this deformity which she constantly talks about, and he talks about, and other people do too, that he looked different from the rest of the world. Because she went on disliking him and hating him all through his life, that maybe robbed of mother love, he took his revenge on the world by making sure that he didn't do anything lovable to anybody else. So it's in those sort of ways that you start getting inside the character. And when you do that, of course, you discover as an actor an interesting thing about human beings which I hold on to, is that if someone is behaving badly, it's because they've got a problem. That problem may be intensely personal and they may never reveal it. And that means that, or suggests that there's no such thing as an evil person. That even Hitler, even might say Vladimir Putin, does terrible things. He wasn't born like that. He was born, as we all were, just as an innocent baby. But something happened.
Yes, yeah.
The mind landed on something that puzzled them and bothered them and disturbed them. And they visited their unhappiness on other people and then did what we might call evil things.
Later. And that's the
But
actor's
that
job.
people are good and bad, no, I don't go for that. Religions often talk about saintly people and evil people, but that implies a belief in the devil and so on, which is not something I believe in. So I always go for the humanity of the person and stick up for the character.
You've got to find that empathy, something that clicks for you to actually like them, however abominable. Well, you mentioned Richard III, and of course you've got Iago, and which brings me on to the subject of Shakespeare. And I'd like to invite Jalal up. Got a question for you here. I think this, Ian, might throw the cat amongst the pigeons, this one, for you. Because I think I know where you stand on this, but here we go.
Hello, Sir Ian.
How are you?
I've heard that your good friend Derek Jacobi Young has said that the legendary playwright Shakespeare wasn't actually a man named William Shakespeare from Stratford. It was actually an earl named Edward de Vere. But I've heard that you really believe that Shakespeare was the man from Stratford. So, what convinces you that he wasn't, that he actually is the man, William Shakespeare?
Well, it never occurred to me that he couldn't be, because it all fitted in rather nicely. Stratford, a little market town in the middle of England, had a very good school, and Shakespeare's father was the mayor of Stratford, and would very likely have gone to the school, where he would have learned a little bit of Latin and a bit of Greek, and many of the classical stories on which his plays are based. He then was certainly William Shakespeare found in London, because there are records of that. There was certainly William Shakespeare acting in London. That's a fact. So why would one disbelieve that this man had written the plays? Because actors often do become playwrights. Well, Derek and other distinguished practitioners in the theatre pride themselves on being historians, and Derek read history at Cambridge. And he says, well, there's no evidence that William Shakespeare went to the school at Stratford. There are no records of his name down in a book. Well, no, but there are no records of any sort. So nobody knows who actually went to that school. But isn't it likely, most likely, that the son of the mayor went to that school? No, says Derek, it's not. We don't know it for a fact, therefore it must be discounted. And he goes through all his life in that way and says, where is the evidence? And the big evidence, which I must say is a puzzle to me, is that in his will, when Shakespeare was, we believe, famous playwright with 37 plays behind him, didn't seem to own a single book. Well, that's
unusual.
Interesting and a puzzle and maybe a problem. But it's not proof that somebody else wrote the plays, is it? Oh, maybe he didn't have any books. There we are. Not many people did in those days. So I did tackle Derek with this one night when we were on holiday together. It was quite late at night, and he'd had quite a bit of his favourite white wine. And I said, Derek, tell me why you don't think Shakespeare. Oh, he said, I'm not going to go into that. You'll only get upset. I said, I won't, I promise. He said, you will, you'll get upset. No, I said, no, I'd just like to discuss it, I'm interested. So he reluctantly started to tell me his reasons. And he'd not been going for more than 2 minutes before I suddenly shouted out and said, Derek, stop it! And got really angry with him. So There we are. We don't talk about it, and because in the end it doesn't matter, of course. Does it? You know, in these days of celebrity, we think we must know everything about the person, rather than just the work that they've produced. I think in Shakespeare's case, at this distance, if it turned out that Shakespeare was a woman, or a group of women, or a group of monkeys who'd written the play, it would be interesting, but it wouldn't matter, because it's the plays that matter, I think, is the answer.
Well, it's one of those examples of good friendships are based on maybe things that are not said. So maybe the less said about that. Yeah. I've got a question from, well, I can't remember who sent this, but I'm quoting the question that came in by email. In your production of Macbeth, with it being played in a very intimate way at the other place, did you ever find yourself out of control with the audience being so close to you?
Yes, I think I did a little bit, and that's what made it rather exciting for the audience. They could sense that, although most of the performance was controlled, it did seem to be happening in front of them. There was a moment when Macbeth sees the ghost of a man he's murdered. I'd be shouting away in the scene and reacting to the ghost in a horrified way. And I found that my nose began to run and bodily fluids were coming out of my nose without me knowing and without me doing anything about it. And that happened every single performance. So I must have been doing something right physically.
I asked because it was Judi that sent the question.
She what?
I asked you because it was Judi Dench that sent you the question for me to ask.
Oh, is it? Well, maybe she's referring to something that I used to do to her and grab her inadvertently. No, and there were even things that happened, as they do often in plays, of an unexpected nature which the audience didn't observe. Little funny things between the actors. Maybe she's referring to that.
I think so. She was telling us when you did, she baked a cake and all the little models on the cake started to melt in a sort of off-center direction, and when she came on the stage, you were all standing there like this, you know. I can't remember the details.
Well, Judi is such a wonderful actor. She scarcely needs to rehearse. It's quite extraordinary. She works away at home on the lines, learning the lines, and making decisions, I suppose, about what she's going to do. And unlike an actor, the actor that I am, one who plods along and needs a lot of advice and a lot of help and a lot of direction, she doesn't. And so rehearsals can get a little bit boring for Judith, because she's already there, she's got it. And maybe that's why she likes playing pranks and jokes.
I know.
But of course it's very engaging when such a beautiful and wonderful person, a wonderful actor, can also take time out to have some fun. It's great.
Well, Ian, you're immensely famous with so many roles, but Shakespeare, for certainly me and a lot of the students here will have seen your Macbeth and Richard III on film. Iman has got a question for you concerning Shakespeare.
Hello. We'd like to know what's been your favorite Shakespeare role that you've played, why, and what you learned from it.
Do you know, I'm rather fond of them all. Even the horrible people like Iago and Richard III, because I enjoyed playing them. I think often it isn't just the part, you know, it's the circumstances in which you do it. Whether you were particularly friendly with the other actors, whether you enjoyed the tour that you went on, whether the audience liked it, whether the critics liked it. And So probably in Shakespeare, Macbeth and Richard III, not Hamlet, not Leontes, not Romeo, maybe King Lear, most recent Shakespeare, I did before Hamlet. And why did I like them? Well, as I say, because the circumstances all worked out well. But it is fun playing the baddies, you know.
Of course, of course. They always have the best lines. They always have the best lines. Ian, there's one role that you haven't done, at least as far as I know, and I've got a student here who would like to ask you about that, which brings us on to the next part of our questions.
Okay.
Hello, Sir Ian McKellen. I've got a question.
Hello.
Have you ever played Prospero in The Tempest? And if not, why not? And do you think Gandalf will influence your performance, or are they entirely different wizards?
Good. I have played Prospero at a theatre in Yorkshire, and I was absolutely dreadful. Couldn't get near it. And if Peter Jackson, who directed Lord of the Rings, had ever seen that performance of mine, I don't think I would have got the part of Gandalf, who, I suppose there are certain similarities between them. They're both rather strict, but Prospero's a boring old man, really, unlike, I think, Gandalf, who's an entertaining, very, very old man. I mean, he's always having a joke and a jape, isn't he, Gandalf? Think of the fireworks and so on. So I don't think there are really any connections, although they both dabble in magic. What's difficult about Prospero is that he never stops talking whenever he's on stage, and is clearly rather pleased and interested in himself in a way that I didn't find very entertaining. And some of the language is rather difficult. It was written towards the end of his life, and Shakespeare didn't make things too simple for his actors. And the production wasn't very good, and so on, so on, so on. It all ended up to disaster, I felt. And yet, I know audiences loved it. And it's an odd play, that, if you ask any actor about playing Prospero, or another character, they would say, oh, I didn't much enjoy being in The Tempest. But audiences like it. Mainly, I think, is because it's a short play.
Well, that brings us on to, I think, what so many are wanting to hear about. And this is Hala. She's got a question for you concerning Lord of the Rings.
Oh, that's good.
Hello, Sir Ian.
Hello.
So when you played Gandalf the Grey in Lord of the Rings, and in one scene you said, "You shall not pass to the demons," and you went from Gandalf the Grey to the White Wizard. Do you know if the White Wizard remembers being Gandalf the Grey and all his memories with Bilbo? Because he seems more mature than Gandalf the Grey.
Yes. He does remember. Because there's a short scene that links the two of them in the second film, The Two Towers, and he refers back and tells them what happened to him when he died, having slain the Balrog. He was pulled down, you remember, and fell and fell and fell, and was destroyed and laid out on the mountaintop, and there's a shot of me naked, or my face and shoulders, and coming to life. And the colour of my hair has changed, and I look a bit different, and I've turned into Gandalf the White. So he does remember that, but it doesn't impinge on him too much. Yes, I much preferred Gandalf the Grey. I thought he was more fun. I'd like to spend time with him. Gandalf the White, however, is on a mission. He's been sent back to do something absolutely specific, and he has to pull it off. He has to get that ring destroyed. And he mustn't make any mistakes. So he's a man who's got a job to do. He's determined to do it, and he will do it. And everybody else will do what they're told and so on.
When you When you did that,
I just find that slightly less attractive as a person to be with than Gandalf the Grey.
So, well, there's a question you mentioned about the ring, and did anything leave the set when you finished the film? Have you got any of the
Yes,
ring?
I did filch the keys to Bag End, which is where the hobbits live.
Yeah.
I can't show them to you, so I've got them hanging up upstairs from the ceiling, out of the reach of Peter Jackson, who, when I last saw him in New Zealand, said he'd got everything from every costume, every prop, every sword from the productions. One day they'll go into a museum. But the one thing he couldn't find was the keys to Bag End.
We won't tell anyone, don't we?
No, I've told him, I said, well, you never get those back from me, I've got those. Of course, they're not real keys, they look like keys, but they're made of polished, what are they made of? Fiberglass.
Plastic.
And they look exactly as if they're rusty old metal, but they're not. We were each given the sword, our sword. So I've got Glamdring, again downstairs, but there were many Glamdrings, there were many swords used, all pretending to be the same one, so that's all right.
When you take on comic characters, fictional characters, fantastical characters, and of course this brings me to the Magneto, I've got a question from Suhina.
Hi sir, how are you?
Which concerns that.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, sir, and you?
Good.
That's good. So regarding Magneto, was it easy to get into the mindset of playing the character who walks such a fine line between hero and villain?
I'm afraid you just cut out at the end.
Repeat it, yeah.
Just say it again.
Was it easy to get into the mindset of playing a character who walks such a fine line between hero and villain?
Well, I give the same answer as I did about playing Richard III or Iago or Macbeth, who all do dreadful things. I looked at it from Magneto's point of view. Magneto has thought of the problems of how people who are different, like the mutants, fit into society. And he had decided that the best way was his way, which was to risk violence and that sort of antisocial behaviour, because the end in view was more important. Now, Professor X has a different way of approaching this division, as often happens in civil rights movements, whether you take to the streets and make a fuss and risk violence. You know, women lost their lives trying to get the vote for women, for example. And you look at the history of black people, let's say in South Africa or
America.
North America, you know, there's been violence in the streets. I tend to think Professor X is right, but that's just me. Playing Magneto, I didn't have a problem. I just thought he thought it through, and that was his temperament, and suited his ambitions. Never forgetting that as a child he has suffered great abuse and lost his parents in the Holocaust, in the concentration camps, which is where the first X-Men film begins. So again, one could find a reason why he thought as he did, and when you found that reason, then you can just as an actor believe it and get on with it.
Yes, sir. And also, I would like to know, if both Gandalf and Magneto were to battle, who would win?
Gandhi, the old man. He's been at it for over 7,000 years. No, Magneto wouldn't have a chance, I don't think. He'd be cunning, wouldn't he? And he'd do it with a grin, yeah.
I've got a question, Ian, which moving on from those, and we're conscious of the time. You recently did Who Do You Think You Are, I think, and I've got a friend who's She's working as a counsellor, was here, but she's working as a counsellor now in the UK. And she's asked the question, what was your biggest takeaway from the experience of tracing your family history on the BBC's show, Who Do You Think You Are?
Are your students familiar with that programme?
Some? Do you give it a little preamble as to what it is?
Well, you're invited to look at some evidence that the experts have discovered about your past, about your family. It can be long distance family, all based on actual records and actual facts. And in my case, they uncovered the fact that I had a quite recent relative who I'd never heard of, who was a professional actor.
Oh, really?
And discovered that there was another quite close relative, his father in fact, who had established in the north of England, in the working community there, the idea that people didn't have to work on Saturday afternoons as well as Sundays. So at the weekend was created by my ancestor. And others who had connections with things that I care about, like the Lake District, an area in the north of England that I knew as a child, very beautiful, but it was first illustrated in a book by a relative of mine. And the fact that I had a professional actor, and someone who knew the Lake District, and someone who cared about social justice, or things which I do too, was rather reassuring. And I thought, oh, well, I do belong to this family, even though I never knew who they were. It's rather reassuring. But of course, some people, when they do the program, discover that they have rather murky pasts. In my case, we didn't discover that.
Well, I've got a question about that sort of status, you might say. This is Sean. He's got something to ask.
Hello, Sir Ian. So, you're known as Sir Ian McKellen, yet you received your doctorate title in 2014. How do you feel about the title of Dr. Sir Ian McKellen?
How do I feel about the title?
Dr. Sir Ian McKellen.
Doctor?
Yeah.
Yes, I am a doctor. Sean, I'm a professor as well. and a sir, and a canite.
A canite?
Well, in my case, none of it matters, really, because I'm not a real doctor, and I'm not a real professor, and I'm certainly not a knight on horseback with a sword, you know, so... Actors do get spoiled, you know.
It's good fun. It's good fun.
I think actors never need birthdays, because we have parties all the time. We have first night parties, we have last night parties, we have parties after we've done 100 performances, we have parties when the film is over, we have parties when the film starts. Who needs a birthday party after all that? People would think we're far too special, and we get really, really spoiled. And part of that is if people think, oh, well, let's give him a title, let's give him a name. Probably one shouldn't accept these things, and I don't like being called Sir very much, because I don't want to be separated out from my friends, and certainly not when I'm working with them. It's the first thing I make clear, please, nobody call me Sir. There are other actors who like to be called Sir and insist on it, but it seems to me a little bit old-fashioned and unnecessary, and it's so particular to this country. Except every country has the idea of medals, don't they, for civilians as well as for people who've been brave on the battlefield. I think it's appropriate that a nation should be able to say to somebody, if they have done well in their field, whatever it is, on the football field, or in politics, or in teaching, or acting, or anything, then to say you deserve a medal, our thanks, the thanks of the nation. It's very gratifying for the recipient, and indeed for the person who the nation that's giving this award. What makes these awards different in the UK is that there is a title attached to some of the medals, and it's that I think perhaps should be. It's time for it to go.
Well, it's the well-deserved accolade, and I'm very conscious of time.
Okay,
I know I've not asked all the students to come up and ask questions. They'll kill me, I know, tomorrow. I'm going to turn around and ask, is there anybody that has not asked a question who would like to ask a question? Zach, I think we touched on that. Let me see. Zoe, if you'd like to run up quick, if you could. Last few, and everybody's got to leave very soon, which is our end of the week. Zoe?
Oh, I see. Hello.
Hi. How have directors and performers you've worked with within different genres affected your overall acting?
I didn't catch that. How is my what?
How have directors and performers you've worked with within different genres affected your overall acting?
Very good question, and totally, I would say. Unless I have a director who really is looking after me and helping me and suggesting things to me, I won't be any good. And that's be true of film, particularly where I wasn't trained as a film actor, and I've had to pick it up as I went along. And it's always easier if you're working with wonderful actors. If you're working with people who aren't very good or are miscast or haven't quite landed on it, then you may make the stupid decision of trying to act their part for them, help them along. You know, when your responsibility is just to look after yourself. So I would say, yes, I've worked with some wonderful directors, and I'm grateful to them all.
If
I could just say that anyone who's not asked me a question, I bet if you went onto my website, Ian, whatever it is,
I'll tell them, I've got it.
You probably find that the question you wanted to ask me, I've already answered, but online. It's a big site. It's got everything I've ever done, but it's also in the early days, I used to answer questions that people sent in, and so there's a further resource there if you need it.
Liam, I'm going to bring it just to an end. I don't know if Miss Cannon is here. Is she here? Yep, if you'd like to. I know, you're all going to kill me, but I am aware of you guys have got to get the bus as well. They're all shaking their heads, you see. The buses will be waiting, and they're all going, no, we want to stay. But tomorrow, well, actually, it's the end of our week, so, but here we are. I'm going to sort of wind it down, and we'll just do one last thing. I'm going to hand you over to the head of our secondary school, Rachel Cannon.
Hello, Rachel, nice to see you.
Hello, I'm also Jerry's better half, so thank you so much for giving us this wonderful opportunity and giving our students the chance to ask these fantastic questions, really insightful, and it was just absolutely amazing. I'm a bit speechless, so thank you so much, Ian. It's been an absolute treat and an absolute pleasure. We've just been given an extra week's holiday by order of the King, so we've got 2 special things to celebrate today, but I think yours is the best. So thank you so much for your time. On behalf
Look, we were talking about. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
yes.
Of course.
I've got the keys to Bagan, but I've also so that is actually one of the hats I wore.
Wonderful.
And very difficult it was to keep on too. Sometimes I had to put a little bit of a elastic band under my chin. It's a stupid hat, isn't it? But
wonderful.
I like it, and it's faded over the years. You can see it's blue there, and what? Nothing there. So there we are. Look, it's lovely to meet you all. I'm sorry we're not doing it in person, and maybe one day we will. Have a wonderful little holiday. That's excellent. And don't give up on Shakespeare. I don't know if you do much of it in class there, but you do.
Yes.
It's not easy. It's not easy for me. But some of it is. And if you think of the most famous line that Shakespeare ever wrote, to be or not to be, that is the question. Those words are understood by a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old. They're simple. What is difficult is, what does it mean? And of course, in answering what does it mean, you get into the heart of Shakespeare, because he sets the mind whirring. And he does ask questions and explains to you about the variety of human nature that it has always been amongst us. So hold on to the fact that a lot of Shakespeare is very simple, but if it's not, don't hesitate to ask and to discuss. Don't throw it away and say it's too difficult, because in the end, you know, it's the difficult things which are those are the problems that are worth solving, aren't they? If you get it straight away, not always as interesting.
Well, I'm just going to bring
I
this.
send you lots of love. You look a lovely group of people, and I give you all a big hug. Till we meet again.
I hope I can see you in a moment, but one big round of applause again.